So when people ask me about my earliest experiences, I do go back to the Toxteth riots, and the reason being is because I'm guessing I must have been about 9 in the 80s. And for me, the Toxteth riots was me going to the corner shop that you could see from our house for the paper for my mum, you know, because you could do that in them days. And actually just looking on the floor and seeing sweets everywhere and actually thinking, yeah, hey, Christmas has come early, not realising to look up and look at the debris and the smashed glass, you know, all the smashed windows in the shops and stuff, and what had actually happened. And then obviously when I've gone home and I'm kind of like a bit confused with loads of sweets, by the way, and then I'm hearing on the news all the things that had happened the night before. It was absolutely devastating. And there's a bit of a juxtaposition because I also have another early memory, which was with the first black dance company in Liverpool called Delado, that somebody recently is actually starting to get all the memorabilia, the photographs, and put everything together, which is about time. And they were the first company in Liverpool to do black African dance. And I think I was actually a bit younger, so I think I was about 8, and I did my first stint on TV doing African dancing with Delado at a place called Exchange Flags. In fact, it was a programme, but it is a place in Liverpool called Exchange Flags, which I believe the programme was named after, which was aired on ITV at the time. So my earliest memories kind of go back to that. And I also went to Windsor Street School, which I absolutely loved. I'm still in touch with my primary school teacher, Miss Anne Maloney, who can tell you lots of stories. This is a white lady who worked with lots of different children from different backgrounds, but actually she was quite political, and she always tells me this story, and I actually need to capture this story, about how she would go into schools, she would go through the books and she would take books off the shelves and go to like the head of the school and say, you know, why is there a book about a gollywog? Why is this book there? And she would question that, and she got into trouble for many times over many years, and she still has them books now. And I do know if I was to ask her, she would show me, and she is getting on. And I do feel that this is a story that really needs to be captured, because throughout all of the work that I've done within my community as a professional actress, going to university and all of that kind of stuff, she's almost followed my career. She's always been there in the background. You know, she came to one of the latest events that I put on, you know, and I just watch this woman and I think this woman worked with so many people in this community, and she inspired me, she pushed me and helped me to believe in myself and everything I could do. And again, she, for me, is an unsung hero, you know, and you see, whenever you see her at any events, you see so many people who are adults now, you know, grandparents even coming up to her, and they're just so happy to see it, because their memories are so happy of this one woman that I believe that helped to change a lot of things within the community politically, when I talk about the books, but also the people, the young people, and their minds and their self-belief, self-esteem and confidence. So if I really go back to one of my earliest memories, it was with Miss Maloney, as we called her. She would literally say, right, Charisse, we had like a stage, you know, get up on the stage and give us a song and a dance and stuff like that. And I didn't realise as a child that actually that was someone that was encouraging me. That was encouraging me to actually be myself and to entertain and enjoy it and not feel any kind of way about entertaining people. And I think that has fed right through my whole career. And I'm always going to mention it. I'm always going to talk about it, because I think there's so many unsung heroes within our community growing up, and you'll get lots of people that'll say, you know, there was a special teacher, there was a special person or a mentor, but for me, my earliest memory is with this lady that is still in my life now. I still have the privilege to be able to pick up the phone and ask her how she's doing, how she is. But I really would like at some point for her story to be documented.
Crawford House is a social enterprise. I would call it one of those intervention programs that were set up after the riots. Crawford House actually was set up in 1995. Well, after the riots, there were a few government programs that were aimed at providing employment or training for black people. These were not, for me, they were not comprehensive enough, and they were not long enough. They were only short-term projects, and at the end of it, things will come back to square one. So it didn't really do much in dealing with the high unemployment problem, especially in Tuxteth. And as you know, Tuxteth is one of the, in those days, even now, one of the most deprived in the country. Obviously, in terms of high unemployment and a few other issues. So those government programs, there were quite a few of them, were not really comprehensive enough to deal with this problem. So the idea then was for the black community themselves to set up programs, enterprises that would complement the provision of the public sector, which is the government and the local authority. So, like Crawford House started in 1995, and the idea is to obviously challenge racism and support young people, provide employment, create jobs and training. Provide skills for young people to enable them get employment. So that's one of the, so there were quite a few at that time that were set up. We also have the Kumbo Mani, but Crawford House itself, as it is, we moved into this building in 2006, and since then, we've done a lot. The idea, this is a community hub. It provides facilities which were lacking at that time for community groups, facilities for celebrating other events, like if you're doing christening or you're celebrating a birthday, or you're having a conference, instead of going elsewhere, maybe going to a hotel or elsewhere where it's going to be very expensive, you come to a community setting as this, and you feel comfortable as well. So we do, apart from providing community facilities like the hall where we are, people use it. Community groups use it to have celebrations. We also undertake training. We do trainings, employability training, that give people the skill to look for employment, because employers often make excuses that people are not skilled. Black people have no skills to enable them get employment. So we provide them those skills here. And also for people who come from non-English speaking countries, they have difficulty actually getting employment because of their lack of knowledge of the English language. They can't speak it, they can't understand it as well. So we do provide them with English courses that give them the basic speaking and writing skills that would enable them get employment. So these are the things we deliver. We deliver here at Crocodile House.
I was 6, the first time I touched clay. I got stuck into art. I worked a lot with paper. And then I decided to make a career out of being an artist in '93 after I'd done my teacher training. And then I started making work with fiberglass resin. Now, my first encounter with fiberglass resin was when I was at boarding school, and I made a canoe, and I was really absolutely hooked on that material. I used it a lot when I did my foundation course in Carlisle. In fact, people didn't like it very much because of the smell. And then when I did my degree, in fact, they separated me out into a different room because the smell of the fiberglass got to everybody. But I carried on working in fiberglass until I was diagnosed with cancer in 2015, which I think I got cancer because I worked in fiberglass for so long. But now I work solely in recycled materials, particularly plastics. So I'm still working with plastics, but in a different way, because I class myself as the era of plastics. You know, plastics were introduced as of when I was a child, and I had a book. My mum bought me a book, Sculpting in Plastics, which was all about using those chemical processes. So I was hooked on that process, and I loved it. And I think I just worked out the way I felt like I could make anything in fiberglass resin when I stopped, basically. But I remember my partner saying to me when I was in hospital, "What are you going to do now if you're not going to work in fiberglass?" And it just evolved, the process of working with recycled materials. I'd done 2 pieces the year before I got cancer with recycled materials. I made an elephant and I made a tiger. So I was already on that path, but I didn't realise that I would stick with that path until I'd recovered from cancer. Well, I think because I was born with cerebral palsy, and I have very bad dyslexia. I think my mum encouraged me to go down the line of doing art, because really I couldn't really do anything else. You know, I didn't really read till I was 14. I didn't really have anything that I could concentrate on or be focused on apart from the art. I mean, now maybe I would have been diagnosed as ADHD or whatever, one of those labels, but at the time there weren't those kind of labels. My mum, being very strong in education, managed to get me into a boarding school, which the authority paid for me to go, and that was great, because that allowed me to focus on my art. And more practical subjects like farming, because I've got a O-level in farming, you know, rather than the academic side. So yeah, everyone used to say to her, "Why are you doing that? Because you'll never make a living and you'll never have any money." But that's not true. I do, yeah. It's very subtle, but it is there. And I think Liverpool, because it's so diverse, but it's diverse in its own little segments, if you know what I mean. So you've got the Chinese community and you've got the Somali community, and they don't really mix. They do a little bit. I mean, what I love about walking down the centre of Liverpool actually is the amount of different mixed people that you see. And you see, in fact, I saw a woman the other day who was a redhead, but you could see the black blood in her as well, and it was so nice to see. I just think people, you know, I said to a boy the other day when I was in the workshop, we were talking about racism, and this black boy was from Caribbean, and I said to him, you've got to remember that we are not a minority, we are a majority. Globally, we are a majority. And he looked at me and he smiled, the biggest smile I've ever seen in my life. And he said, oh, I've never thought about it like that. That's made me really happy.
You're referring to the findings of the Gifford report. Very little ever changes when we talk about how racism impacts on communities like ours. What I find tends to happen is that by various means and various ways, there are restrictions and constraints placed on, you know, institutions like, say, the police or schools and colleges, or the local authorities, like, for example, the amendment to the Race Relations Act 1976 in 2000 took place as a result of the Macpherson inquiry into the policing of the murder case involving Stephen Lawrence. You know, the findings of, you know, the findings of an inquiry like that and the recommendations that were made are typical of the sort of advances that are made decade by decade in terms of how to tackle and confront racism, whether it's institutionalized or it's a form of hate abuse. But despite the fact that these advances are made, what I tend to find happens is that racism transforms itself, it kind of evolves, and it remains, but it manifests in different forms, we find consistently that we live with the same imbalances. So disproportionately, there are still more black people unemployed than white people in the city. There are still less black kids coming out of school with qualifications than white kids. In this city, disproportionately, black people are still receiving inferior health care compared to white people. And that's regardless of whether the health care is for physical ailments and illnesses or whether it's for mental health care. The policing remains extraordinary in the sense that it is still overtly and disproportionately targeted towards black people. So black people in the city are amongst the most heavily policed. So despite advances that are made, you know, following inquiries such as Gifford or Macpherson or whatever else, and all the amendments and all the recommendations and all the new laws that are introduced, apparently to contain or even intended to eliminate racism in certain quarters, racism still prevails here, and not just here, all over the country. You know, it's the common experience of black people. It's why Black Lives Matter, when that arrived here, following the, you know, in a big way, following the death of George Floyd in America in 2020, that's why the arrival of Black Lives Matter seemed to mean so much to so many people. I don't think we would have got the response that we did from black and white people who support Black Lives Matter, by the way, unless it was acknowledged that racism is still a problem in a city like ours. You know, it's really ironic, you know, but when this so-called Sewell report, which was the government commissioned investigation into whether or not institutionalized racism is still a fact of life in this country, when that report came out in April, it's ironic to me that the government, you know, found complete agreement with that report. And they went even further than what the report suggested, insisting that not only is institutionalized racism impacting any longer on the lives of black people in this country. But their conclusions were that, there is no such thing as institutionalized racism. And I found that ironic, really, because if you have a situation where, you have black communities all over the country, and they'll all readily tell you the same thing, that, racism remains a daily part of our life, and here's why. It's ironic that a government that sits in an ivory tower of whiteness can insist that racism no longer exists, at least in an institutionalized form, in this country any longer. So the thing that makes us feel uncomfortable these days is not only that after Gifford, after Macpherson, we still have a situation where we still live with racism in its various forms, but we can't really accept the idea that we've progressed or we've made advances in any way if the government themselves are insistent that despite what we express and articulate, their insistence is that we no longer have institutionalized racism in this country.
I don't think you realise you want to become an activist. I think it's something that you're naturally absorbed into. I go back to my days at senior school, where I was very, very fortunate to go to a boarding school, and I'd say an excellent boarding school. And we were part of the Young Farmers Union, and I was the treasurer for the Young Farmers Union, and I was the only black young farmer. Can you imagine that? And I remember in one of our AGMs, which was held in Wrexham, I remember taking the whole floor on over an issue, and I think that was what started me off. I think it was that just naturally clicked in my head and took me. I was 15. I think they were, without doubt. There's something about your experiences growing up that now things are wrong, and it's up to you whether or not you challenge that wrongness. Some people choose not to challenge it. I always challenged it. And there's still a lot of wrong things out there now that I will still and always challenge.
Well, we've been here a long time for the start. I mean, some people can trace their ancestry back 10 generations. So we're completely different than anywhere else in Britain. I remember when I went to work in Brixton with young black kids, and they couldn't, apart from my accent, they couldn't understand why I didn't speak Patois. And I said, well, the reason why you speak Patois is because your parents are from Jamaica or wherever. My patois is French patois, but in terms of English, that's what happens when you're born brought up here, and you will be in that position too. So that was a bit of an oddity. Englishman, a black man who speaks like an Englishman. So what makes Liverpool, black Liverpool, unique? Well, it's that. The sense of long-established links, the suffering, the racism, discrimination. They used to say, back in the 60s, oh, when these second immigrants grow up, discrimination will end with them. And I said, well, no, it hasn't in Liverpool for 10 generations. So what makes you think that all of a sudden it's going to happen? And of course it didn't happen. Second generation, third generation are getting discriminated as much as anybody else. Well, the one that we're about to start is about Liverpool 8 nightclubs. At one stage, there was 42 nightclubs in a small area like Liverpool 8. Not all at the same time, but over the period of time. At any one time, there's probably about 15 clubs. Started by groups of West Africans and West Indians, Caribbean people. And there was the Somali club, there was the Nigerian club, there was every nationality that was represented in Liverpool at a club. And the reason for that is because they were discriminated against in town. They couldn't go to they couldn't get entry to the Liverpool, the town centre clubs. So people, they had shebeens, house parties, and then some of them turned into clubs. And they provided an economic outlet as well, employed people. So we're still researching this. I mean, I remember from my own childhood about some of these clubs. And the problem is that most of the owners are dead now. So we're trying to research the children of these club owners. We've located quite a few in America as well. So we're going back to them to interview them about why did your father or grandfather start a club, and what difficulties did he face? So it's quite an exciting project, and I'm looking forward to getting involved with it. Well, there was a Gladray Club, which was run by my cousin Rachel. Gladray was two local black women, one named Gladys and the one Rachel, so the Gladray. There was the Beacon that was owned by Joe Bygraves. He was a British boxing champion in the 50s and 60s, 50s. And there's a Nigerian club, the Somali club, the Star Club. I can't think right now all the ethnic groups and nationalities that were represented in them clubs, but there was at least, I can recall about 15 or 20 of them. I actually went into the 15 or 20 of them. So I've got memories of them as well, because that was our outlet in terms of going out. And before them were shebeens and house parties. Well, house parties, it was a place where you could go and buy drinks and stay there till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So I'll be putting my own memories of that era into the project. But I'm looking forward to it.
It was us who told Gifford that Liverpool practiced apartheid. I mean, the most telling thing for me was when we entertained some South African ANC people in Liverpool, and we took them to the local black clubs and that. And when we came out at, I think, 3 o'clock in the morning and stood on Prince's Road to get a taxi, the taxi went past us and carried on going past us. And I remember the ANC fighter saying to me, I can't believe this, we get this in our country all the time. I didn't believe that we would experience it in Liverpool. So it was us who told Lord Gifford about the apartheid, I have always maintained on any radio programme, anything that I've ever done, that it needs addressing. Liverpool practices apartheid. Because I think when institutions actually have a good look at themselves and think about what apartheid is a whole white space. And it isn't about taking in one person as a porter or a cleaner who was black in order to say, well, you know, we're equality. You know, you've only got to look at the bid company in town that supposedly represents all those businesses, and the Chamber of Commerce and wherever. They go into town all the time. Do they not think that there's something not right about a city that is the capital of culture, and you can't see people of this culture of the world that is bringing loads and loads of money into Liverpool in any of the shops, in any of the managerial positions? I mean, we did a big report, I think it was 1980, I think it was SLP, along with an MST that did it, that showed there was hardly any black people working in the Liverpool city centre. If you move to today, I think there's even less than there was then. So, no, I unashamedly say Liverpool practices apartheid. Oh, definitely, because I mean, Liverpool tried, well, it did, for publicity to make an apology for its role in slavery. I forget which year that was really, it was at the 90s, to which we all protested because they'd brought in all the cameras from across the world who had probably benefited from the slavery because we were the triangle, part of the triangle. And yes, you know, we had all kinds of these issues still going on that, and we thought it was absolutely hypocritical to make an apology and just use us again as a publicity stunt. So yes, I think it stems from people's attitude, paternalism, you know, pennies for the black babies, that sort of, we'll minister to you, but there's no anti-racism. And it's on the basis of being, it's not good enough, as everybody says, to not be racist. You have to actively be anti-racist in this society. And it's getting worse, isn't it? You know, the more right-wing that these governments across the world become, who are the victims, should we say, or who has to survive? I think survive is a better word. Survive these terrible things that people believe. Just open and open fascism in some places. Just open and open fascism.
So I was really fortunate enough to, I got an unconditional offer at John Moores University. But before then I decided that I was going to go to London and be a TV presenter and find myself. But really what I did, I partied. I partied. But you know, it was the best experience for me because actually I was mixing with diverse groups of black people, diverse groups of black British people, because my experiences at that time were mainly Scousers. So going to London was the best experience ever. And then came back to Liverpool, went to university, and even then I was the only black person at my uni. I wouldn't say, within my cohort, student-wise, we had fun. However, there were some lecturers, they're not there anymore, there were a couple of lecturers that I would definitely say had some underlying racist behaviour. One experience was when a group of us had to do a group project, and we had to build a website. And it was the concept was mine. I got in contact with all the community members that needed to get interviewed. Like literally I did, I would say 75% of the work. And so I was like the project manager, so I designated roles to different people. Now this one lecturer, when we completed the work, we did really well, but he gave everyone on my team around 65 to 72 points, and he gave me 46. So then when I showed the students my team, they were like, oh my goodness, like, oh, is he serious? So then we then had to, they complained on my behalf, and he had to put me up. And he said, oh, I just didn't know that you were the project manager. And I was like, it doesn't matter if I was the project manager, we're part of a team. So at least there should be a medium in terms of merit. So that was one of my experiences where I was just like, that person just does not like me, and the only possible reason I can think of is because I'm black, and I'm very confident as well. And I realised a lot of people weren't comfortable with a black confident woman, and that's where my Nigerian side comes in. But also the word ambitious became for me like a curse word, like you were cursed. It was never said in a nice way. It was always, oh, you're ambitious. And I think, why shouldn't I be ambitious? And even till this day, I still get, oh wow, you're ambitious. And I'm like, actually, I'm in my 40s. When am I allowed to be ambitious, you know? So that was my experience. And then when I graduated from uni, it actually took me 5 years to actually get into the industry. And I never understood why, but I think it's because of my African name, you know, because once I got in, it was like, oh my God, Gunnar, where have you been? And I was like, I've been knocking on your door for 5 years, you know? So I found it in so many different ways that my name has had an effect on if I get a job or not, because people assume I can't speak English. I've been asked if I can, if my name can be shortened. I've been asked to be given nicknames, and all of that is, well, it's a no. You know, like, Gunan is not a hard word to say. It's so easy. It's just Gunan, like literally. But it's allowed me to fight. I love fighting, I do, but in a strategic way, not in a this angry black woman trope that they keep on throwing at women. But there's ways that you can fight to make change. Oh goodness, I would definitely say that my childhood has shaped me. But shaped me in a sense that I've come from a family that is very well educated. My granddad was a journalist. He worked for Oxford and Cambridge University. And my dad was a doctor. You know, so I've come from high achievers, and I know if I didn't come from a middle class background and a Nigerian background, I wouldn't be where I am now, because the infrastructure within, I would say, the UK society is very racist, and regardless if people want to believe that or not, that's my experience. It's so racist that actually the psychology gaslights people so much to the point where you think you're the problem, because racism is not name calling, it's not the N word, it's not the P word, it's literally not getting promoted, or not getting developed, or your ideas not being heard. So there's different ways that racism shows its ugly head, that a lot of black people, when they leave the UK, actually they do better. So there's the infrastructure that holds people back. So I would definitely say that my upbringing helped, because my granddad more or less wrote a manual, you know, he was working with aristocrats and top boys, when you talk about that infrastructure of top level people, that was my granddad. So he wrote a manual on how we should live in UK society, and my mum literally went with that, and that's why I would say we are the way, me and my brothers, we are where we are. Recent instances in terms of Racism, there was a time when I remember going for an interview and I didn't get the job, and the feedback that I got was, oh, you showed real passion for the industry. We loved your PowerPoint presentation, but there was just something. And I was like, oh. And I was waiting for this person to tell me what that just something was. Until this day, I do not know what that just something was. So, you know, you can take it as you want. Like, to me, that's racism. You know, you can't just say to someone, that's just something. But also, they didn't even sit me down with my interview notes and say, this is where, when you answered this, we expected this. When you said this, we expected that. There was none of that. It was just literally, there was just something. And that's what I had to go with, you know. So that moment, that experience was what pushed me to start my own business. Because then I had to prove to people that I was as amazing as what I thought, as what I am. You know, I wasn't going to let anyone tell me I was no different, because I know I've got ideas, I know I'm intelligent, I know I've got a lot to give to this world. And I was stuck in a place where I wasn't getting noticed and I wasn't being stretched. My ideas weren't being heard. And now that I've started my business, like, I work all over the place, you know. So yeah, I think those experiences should shape who you are for the better, not get you to crawl, you know, in your cave and not dare to come back out again.
When I say activist, it depends what you mean by an activist. People think an activist is a person who goes around whipping up crowds and standing on a platform on a tub, you know. But you can be an activist in many ways. My activism, as someone once said recently, is in my writing. And that's an important way. What you do is what you've got. What you give, if you're a photographer, you do it that way. If you're a writer, you do it that way. You don't go into some area that you know nothing about. You give what you have to give. I interview people, a lot, but I also do a lot of original research, which is usually by, you know, studying documents from all sorts of sources, back to as early as, in the book I'm doing now, I'm doing one on British-born black people, a book called Native Born. I am studying that one.
Can you tell us more about this book?
Yeah, well, basically, it's a book about the history of British-born black people, and it goes so far back. There are Romans who, came at the time of the conquest of Britain, the Celtic conquest of Britain by the Romans, and you find that they brought black people with them. But the interesting bit for me was they were having children here, so they, for me, were British-born black. And what they've done is wonderful researchers like Mark Jobling from Leicester University, was into DNA and so on, and Turi King, people up in Dundee University, all sorts of people have studied this, and they've used strontium-90 as which is a chemical found in the body of people who have eaten food and been born here. They can tell by the bones, by the bone structures and their actual composition of the cells that make up their body, whether they were born in Britain. Wonderful stuff, wonderful. But it's not me. I can't be saying, oh, I'm an expert on this, I'm clever, I know all about these things. Not at all. I'm as, flabbergasted as anybody else to know that. But it goes right through Saxon times, right through into this is why I'm not entirely I greatly respect the Windrush generation and have relatives who belong to it. But I think there's an error going on in the black community in that people are thinking, young men and women are thinking that that is the origin of black people in Britain, and it's nowhere near. We're talking 1,000 years ago. So that's what it's going to be about. But I come right up to the present day, of course, and people think mine are old, being, 1850s. But it's not. When I did my book called Liverpool, not Liverpool Black Pioneers, that was another one, Black Liverpool, the history of Britain's Europe's oldest black community, 1730 to 1918. I had to stop at 1918 after the war because it was just too much for me to write. You can do another. After 18 to me is practically current affairs, is modern writing, But it's a fascinating area, but so many mistakes are made regarding the idea of having. I wasn't in favour of maybe a Windrush Day if it meant thinking that was the origin of black people.
I remember it very, very clearly. I remember it very clearly and quite vividly. It was after I left school in July 1967. And, when you take into account the schools that we went to, I went to St. James's, which was on St. James's Road, right in front of the Anglican Cathedral. So I grew up at the Anglican Cathedral all my life. And we went to school. And we knew when we went to school what was going to happen at the age of 15. We were going to come out, because we were never ever encouraged to achieve anything academically, anything. It was just a question. You go to the working class school, you know what's going to happen. It's either a building site, a factory or a warehouse. Okay? That's the level that you're at in terms of your educational standards, achievements and attainments. So when we come out and the careers office sends you for an interview to Bootle, 5-6 miles away from where I live, that's fair enough. But I know Bootle because when we were kids, we used to jump on the backs of lorries down at the Albert Dock, which was then the Salthouse Dock and the Canning Dock. It was never the Albert Dock or the Prince Albert Dock. But anyway, so we go right up to Bootle and then we get another one back to the Albert Dock Custom House area. So I knew the way. So I walked, it was summertime, and I walked and I got up there and I got to the interview. And the interview was for a second man on the wagon, called Second Man on the Wagon. And that was basically, it was for the Loon Laundry, and the driver's in the driving seat. I'm the second man on the wagon. And basically, I pick up the dirty laundry or drop off the clean laundry. That's the second job, man. So I went for the interview. I was in there about 20 minutes. They were making decisions there, and then he said, no, you haven't got the job. So I came out. It was a hot day. I'd got there, knew how to get there, but when I came out, I couldn't get me bearings on the geography. I couldn't traverse my way around because it was back streets. And I saw a guy who was about 17 years old. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, and I just said, quite openly and friendly, excuse me, mate, can you tell me the way to the Dock Road? Because I was lost. And his immediate response to me, and I was 15, his immediate response to me was, fuck off, you nigger. Whoa. I just thought, that's a bit heavy. Wow. And I just went, yeah, okay, and just turned and walked. Eventually found my way to the Dock Road, but it was on my mind, because what comes running back to you is like, whoa, hold on a minute. I grew up with the Aritis, I grew up with the Tans, I grew up with the Lees, I grew up with the Filmers, I grew up with the Sant'Angelis, I grew up with the Pet. I grew up in the multiest of multiculturalism area you could grow up in. So none of that comes into play. And I was just, wow, why was that? Why did he call me? And then immediately I'll go, me dad. That's my dad, that's my reference, that's his reference to my dad, to me, through me, because that's what he sees. And a penny dropped for me, all that stuff with the Black Panthers, all that stuff with Malcolm X, all that. Whoa. So that gave me a bit of a jerk. That gave me a jerk. I think in the right direction, because it gave me a sense of identity then. Because this is a sense of identity from the racist. That's how they see us in Liverpool. And then I didn't realise it until a number of years later, when I heard Bernie Wenton, the late great Bernie Wenton, say to me, well, not say to me, I heard him make a reference to the fact that somebody asked him a question about his identity, and he said, I am a black person. I might not look black in terms of who I am. He said, but in Liverpool, if you're not black, you're considered to be. And that was like a boom, sort of for me, in relation to a reflection of Liverpool's history, a reflection of how people in this city identify you, even if you are 3-4 generations down the line. They don't care. This is Liverpool, man. This is how it's reflected. I can remember, you know, and I thought about it, and I thought, no, that's wrong. But then I thought, hold on a minute. When I go to the nightclub and I've got my afro and they're saying, yeah, you can come in, you're not coming in. You can come in, you're not coming. And that used to happen to me all the time with my friends, right? And then I'm getting called the black bastard on the football pitch. And I'm getting called a nigger in the football match at Anfield. You know, it's just a lot of pennies drop for you in relation to what it means to you to be living in this city as part of a process of historical racism over the centuries. And it doesn't really matter who you are. There's still a reflection of who you are in relation to your roots and your ancestors, like my great-grandfather. That's where it goes back to. And it goes back to my Bayesian grandfather as well, you know what I mean? And so I see that for what it was when I look back. And then I can see the whole picture of being that 15-year-old to where I am now. And nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. That's what is sort of really intriguing for me in terms of the platforms that we've sort of developed ourselves and risen above. We get to that level and then we get knocked down again. And we get to that level and we get knocked down again. George Floyd happened 2 years ago. Where's all these radical changes that are going on? I've been through so many George Floyds, you know, so many of them. And even at the time of George Floyd, listen, people, you might be on the go now, but you won't be on the go in 2 years. And I'm right. It's like this all the time. We went through the uprisings in 81. The only reasons we got through it was because of our own self-determination. And that's what determines what we do at this moment in time in our lives, where we're going and what we do and how we reflect upon what we've achieved in the past. To bring some sort of quality of life to the black community, to bring some sort of upbringing to them, you know what I mean? Because it's always been a struggle. It's always been a struggle, simply because when I look back at the history of 1919, 1948, 1972, 1981, the black community in this city is all about resistance. Has always been about resistance when you look at that from perspective. Because At 1981, for my involvement in that, I can look back and go, yeah, we achieved great things, but it was all about sustainability, and the aspects of sustainability were never provided by us well, basically for those from those in power who could have endorsed us in many areas of social and welfare development in this city for the black community, and also from the perspective of business and entrepreneurial progress, but it's never happened.
There are all kinds of ways, you know. All people, regardless of race, challenge it wherever they see it, when it is safe to do so, I guess, and educate ourselves, educate oneself, educate other people. I try to contribute to that by the plays and things that I write and perform, just by researching and sharing these stories, especially of people who overcome racism and who challenge it. None more impressively than Paul Robeson, who's my hero and the hero of thousands of people around the world. But he acknowledged people who went before him too, like Frederick Douglass, Ida Wells, and so on. And he, like we, acknowledged the greatness of our ancestry, contrary to the stories that have been told in order to justify our enslavement and exploitation. So I think one of the crucial things that we need to do, speaking as an African, is to discover that pride we have in our ancestry and our achievements. I think just by taking them to these places and showing them that we do belong. I mean, it is an interesting part of my history in this city that my play, called Mr. Robeson, was the last play to be performed at the Everyman Theatre, the old Everyman Theatre, before it was demolished and rebuilt. So I'm speaking in a space which has me as one of the significant acts in this venue's history. And I have performed my second play for a week in the Playhouse studio. And I have performed the same, I have performed Called Mr. Robeson in the main house at the Royal Exchange in Manchester and at Carnegie Hall in New York. So I didn't get to those places by asking. I got there because of the quality of my work and the confidence that I can be there and should be there. So I would like to think that any young people that know that about me and know that about other African descended artists will be inspired to say that, yes, this can be for me too. Even if I don't feel welcome here, I know that it is a place that I ought to be welcomed in, and it will just take time for me and other people to feel comfortable with me being there.
I felt quite marginalised and othered when I first came to Liverpool, not just because of my own sort of insecurities, but also the way people would speak to me, often grouping me with sort of saying others, I let people like you in my house, so therefore I'm not racist, or constantly being asked that stereotypical question of like, where are you from, where are you actually from, and just having lots of microaggressions experience, which I guess hadn't really been on my mind as much when I was in London. I remember my first experience of racism quite vividly. I was walking home from a friend's house and I was being catcalled, and I ignored it, and as I was walking away they called me a black bastard, and it really sort of made my heart sink that it was being used in such a negative way, my skin colour. I'd always used spoken word and art as a way to cope with the world around me, especially during my adolescence. And when I moved to Liverpool, I was completely on my own and I didn't know where to turn. So I turned to art and I realised how powerful it was, and I wanted to make sure that others could access the ability to use arts if they wanted to.
I would agree with that, and I've just done some research recently looking into the barriers black leaders face in employment and getting into leadership positions. And at that time that you're talking about, employment of black people in senior positions, in fact, black people in the council altogether was around 2%. And I don't think that's changed in the last however many years. I know when I last looked at stats for my PhD in 2018, black employment was still at 2%. There was less than 10 people on a wage of up to 60 grand. There were no black people on wages above 60 grand. And they were probably still less than 2%, although they said the figures had gone up to 6.8% in 2018. In 2019, they halved the workforce. So when I re-looked at the stats, the figures were still 2%. So that shows you from 2010 right up to 2018, there'd been no movement and no improvement. I think it's structural racism. I think it's institutional racism. Their policies, practices, their subconscious and conscious behaviours are still showing these gaps. I think Liverpool's Tropical School of Medicine has got real issues around, racism within the workplace, and they don't have many black leaders. I would suspect a lot of the universities don't have many academics at senior levels. It's not unique to Liverpool, it's happening all over the UK. I think there's 1.5% black people in senior positions right across public sector positions or companies in the UK at the moment.